There's a force inside you right now. You feel it when you're drawn to someone. You feel it in the restlessness that keeps you up at night. You feel it in the creative surge that demands expression. Most people think they know what this energy is. They call it desire. They call it temptation. They call it something to control, suppress, or indulge. But Carl Jung saw something entirely different, something the world wasn't ready to hear in 1912, and something most people still don't understand today. When Jung broke from his mentor Sigmund Freud, it wasn't just a professional disagreement, it was a complete revolution in how we understand human consciousness. Freud believed sexual energy was the root of all human behavior, that everything we do traces back to repressed sexual desires. But Jung discovered something far more profound, and frankly, far more threatening to the way society wants to keep you small. Jung understood that what we call sexual energy isn't primarily about sex at all. It's the raw fuel of life itself. It's the same force that drives an artist to create, a mystic to seek truth, and a leader to transform the world. This energy, what Jung called libido, is your creative life force, and society has spent centuries teaching you to fear it, shame it, and waste it. Here's what makes this uncomfortable. If you understood the true nature of this energy, you would stop giving your power away. You would stop numbing yourself with shallow distractions. You would stop playing small in a world designed to keep you manageable. And that terrifies the structures that benefit from your unconsciousness. Jung didn't just theorize about this from an ivory tower. He dove into his own psyche through what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, a period so intense that he questioned his own sanity. What he discovered in those depths changed psychology forever. He found that sexual energy, when understood correctly, is the bridge between your everyday self and your deepest potential. It's the gateway to what he called individuation, becoming fully who you truly are. But here's where it gets interesting. Jung realized that most people are sitting on a reservoir of creative power they don't even know they possess. They feel it as frustration, as longing, as a vague sense that there must be more to life. They channel it into surface-level pursuits, status, validation, endless consumption, never understanding that they're diverting a river's force into a puddle. What if everything you were taught about this energy was designed to keep you from accessing your real power? What if the shame, the guilt, the constant redirection toward external validation was never about morality or protection, but about control? Jung's uncensored truth is this: your sexual energy is sacred fuel, and once you understand how to work with it consciously, you don't just change your life, you transform it entirely. Let me show you how. To understand Jung's radical perspective, you need to know what he was up against. In the early 1900s, Sigmund Freud dominated psychology with a theory that made Victorian society deeply uncomfortable: that sexual repression was the root of all neurosis. Freud believed that libido, the term he used for life energy, was fundamentally sexual. Every dream, every symptom, every slip of the tongue could be traced back to repressed sexual desires, usually stemming from childhood. Jung was initially Freud's star pupil, his chosen successor. But the more Jung explored the human psyche, the more he saw patterns that Freud's sexual reductionism couldn't explain. Jung worked with patients whose symbols and dreams pointed towards something beyond personal sexual history. They contained mythological themes, spiritual yearnings, creative drives that had nothing to do with childhood sexuality. When Jung tried to discuss these observations with Freud, he hit a wall. The breaking point came in 1912 when Jung published Psychology of the Unconscious, later revised as Symbols of Transformation. In it, Jung proposed something revolutionary. That libido wasn't primarily sexual energy, but rather a general psychic energy, the fuel for all psychological activity. Sexual expression was just one possible channel for this energy, not its fundamental nature. Think of it this way: Freud saw a river and insisted it was made of wine because sometimes wine flowed through it. Jung saw that the river was water capable of taking many forms, serving many purposes, and flowing into countless destinations. The sexual channel was one possibility, not the defining characteristic. This wasn't just academics splitting hairs. The implications were massive. If Freud was right, then human beings were essentially animals driven by sexual instinct with civilization built on repression. But if Jung was right, then humans possess creative potential far beyond biological drives. Your deepest energy could be channeled into art, spirituality, scientific discovery, or personal transformation. You weren't trapped by your impulses, you were empowered by your choices. The contrast was stark. Freud's view led backward: dig into your past, uncover your repressions, understand your childhood traumas. Jung's view pointed forward: what is your psyche trying to become? What wants to be born through you? Where is your energy asking to flow? Freud never forgave Jung for this departure. Their friendship, which Freud had described in almost father-son terms, ended bitterly. Jung was cast out of the psychoanalytic movement, branded as a mystic and a traitor. But Jung had discovered something too important to suppress for the sake of professional acceptance: that human beings are not reducible to their drives, and that the energy we call sexual is actually the raw, creative force of consciousness itself. Here's what Jung understood that still makes people uncomfortable. When you label this energy as just sexual, you constrain it. You create shame around it. You build an entire moral framework that says this energy is dangerous, base, something to be controlled by external authorities. But when you recognize it as life force, as creative potential, you reclaim sovereignty over your own consciousness. Jung called this broader conception psychic energy, or libido, in its truest sense. It's the energy that flows when you're completely absorbed in meaningful work. It's what you feel when you're gripped by a creative vision. It's the force behind spiritual experiences, deep conversations, and moments of profound connection with yourself, with others, with something greater than yourself. The sexual expression of this energy is powerful and important, yes, but it's one color in a full spectrum, not the only wavelength that exists. And here's the key: this energy doesn't disappear when it's not being expressed sexually. It transforms, it sublimates, it seeks other outlets. The question isn't whether to suppress it or indulge it. That's the false choice society offers. The real question is, how do you consciously direct this force toward what you want to create and who you want to become? Jung had torn down the walls Freud built around human potential, but that meant Jung also had to answer a harder question. If this energy isn't fundamentally sexual, then what is its real purpose? Why do we have this powerful force flowing through us? The answer would take Jung decades to fully articulate, and it's far more profound than most people are prepared to hear. Jung discovered that what we call sexual energy is actually the universe's creative impulse manifesting through you. Let that sink in for a moment. This isn't poetic language or New Age mysticism. Jung was describing a fundamental principle of how consciousness operates. In Jungian psychology, libido, this primal energy, is the force behind all psychological growth and transformation. It's what drives a seed to become a tree, what compels a child to individuate from their parents, what pushes an adult toward wholeness. Sexual reproduction is one expression of this creative principle, but so is every other form of creation. Art, ideas, relationships, businesses, social change, spiritual awakening. Jung noticed that this energy follows natural cycles, just like water in nature. Sometimes it flows outward into the world through work, relationships, and external achievements. Other times it flows inward into dreams, reflection, and psychological transformation. When this energy is blocked by trauma, by social conditioning, by unconscious patterns, it doesn't simply disappear. It pulls up and creates symptoms: depression, anxiety, addiction, or explosive destructive behaviors. Here's where most people make a critical mistake. They think the goal is to use this energy, to direct it toward productivity or accomplishment. But Jung understood something more subtle. This energy has its own intelligence. It knows where it wants to flow. Your job isn't to control it like a tyrant controlling a river. Your job is to become conscious of it, to recognize its patterns in your life, and to remove the obstacles that prevent its natural flow. Think about moments when you felt truly alive, not just pleasure, but that full-body sense of being completely present and engaged. Maybe it was creating something, maybe it was deep in conversation, maybe it was in nature, maybe it was in intimate connection. That feeling that's your life force flowing freely. That's libido in its uncorrupted form. Jung would say, that's your psyche operating as it's designed to operate. The problem is that most people experience this flow rarely and accidentally. They're caught in what Jung called unconscious identification, living according to scripts written by family, culture, trauma, and convention. The energy is there, powerful as ever, but it's forced through narrow channels. It becomes frustrated desire, chronic dissatisfaction, the sense that life is happening to you rather than through you. But here's the transformative part. When you understand that this energy is fundamentally creative, you stop relating to it as something dangerous that needs to be controlled or something tempting that needs to be indulged. Instead, you start asking different questions. What is trying to be born through me? What creative work is my psyche calling me toward? What part of my personality wants to develop next? Jung called this process individuation, becoming the individual you're meant to be, distinct from collective expectations and unconscious conditioning. And sexual energy, properly understood, is the fuel for this journey. It's not a distraction from your spiritual path. It is your spiritual path, correctly directed. This is why Jung emphasized what he called the transcendent function, the psyche's natural ability to transform energy from one form into another. Sexual energy can become creative output. Anger can become passionate advocacy. Grief can become depth and compassion. The energy itself is neutral. It's a force of nature. What matters is whether you're conscious enough to participate in its transformation or whether it transforms unconsciously, often into something destructive. Consider the artist who channels erotic energy into paintings that move thousands of people, or the activist whose righteous anger becomes focused social change, or the therapist whose own healing journey becomes the foundation for helping others. This is sublimation not in the Freudian sense of repressing the lower for the higher, but in the Jungian sense of transformation and elevation while honoring the energy's essential nature. The hidden purpose of sexual energy, then, is not reproduction, not pleasure, and not even relationship. Though it serves all these functions beautifully, the hidden purpose is evolution. Your evolution, the evolution of consciousness itself. You are a temporary vessel for a force that's been flowing since the beginning of life on Earth. That force doesn't care about your ego's agenda or your society's rules. It cares about growth, transformation, creation, and wholeness. When you grasp this, really grasp it, you stop asking, how do I control this energy? And start asking, what is this energy asking of me? That shift in question changes everything. You move from being at war with yourself to being in partnership with the deepest intelligence in the universe, the intelligence that knows how to turn a single cell into a human being and knows how to turn a wounded person into a whole one. But knowing the purpose isn't enough. The question becomes, how do you actually work with this force consciously? How do you transform raw energy into conscious creation? Jung didn't just describe this energy theoretically. He gave us practical methods for working with it. But I need to warn you, his approach requires something most people aren't willing to give: radical honesty with yourself and the courage to face what you've been avoiding. The transformation process begins with what Jung called making the unconscious conscious. Most of your sexual energy isn't actually blocked by external circumstances. It's blocked by your own unconscious patterns, by parts of yourself you've disowned, by desires you won't admit, by creative impulses you've labeled as impractical or foolish. Here's Jung's first principle: you cannot transform energy you refuse to acknowledge. If you're pretending you don't feel what you feel, if you're numbing yourself, if you're spiritually bypassing by, claiming you're beyond such base concerns, you're not transcending the energy, you're repressing it. And repressed energy always finds a way out, usually in destructive forms. So, The first step is awareness. Pay attention to where you feel this energy in your body. Notice when it rises. Notice what triggers it. Notice where it wants to flow and where you habitually redirect it. Jung encouraged keeping a journal of dreams, fantasies, and strong emotional reactions, not to judge them, but to understand the symbolic language your unconscious uses. The second principle is containment without suppression. This is the most misunderstood aspect of Jung's teaching. He's not saying indulge every impulse. He's saying hold the tension of the energy without immediately discharging it or pushing it away. Sit with desire without acting on it or denying it. This creates what Jung called a temenos, a sacred container where transformation can occur. Think of it like this. If you have sexual energy and you immediately act on it, you get temporary release but no transformation. If you immediately suppress it, you get tension and symptom formation. But if you hold it consciously, feeling it fully, while choosing how to engage with it, the energy itself begins to transform. New possibilities emerge. Creative insights arise. You access deeper layers of your psyche. This is where Jung's concept of active imagination becomes crucial. Active imagination is a practice where you dialogue with the images, feelings, and impulses that arise from your unconscious. When you feel intense sexual energy, instead of just acting on it or pushing it down, you might ask, what are you really about? What do you want to create? What part of me is asking to be expressed? Often, what appears as sexual desire is actually your psyche's way of getting your attention. It might be desire for deep connection that you've been avoiding. It might be creative energy that has no other outlet in your current life. It might be your shadow, the disowned parts of yourself demanding integration. The sexual impulse is the messenger, not the message itself. Jung worked extensively with his own sexual energy and creative impulses through his Red Book period. For years, he recorded elaborate dialogues with inner figures, painted images from his unconscious, and allowed his psychic energy to take symbolic forms. This wasn't indulgent fantasy. It was disciplined inner work that eventually produced his most important psychological discoveries. The third principle is conscious direction. Once you understand what the energy is actually seeking, you can partner with it rather than fight it. If it's seeking creative expression, you create space for art, writing, building, or innovation. If it's seeking depth of connection, you cultivate meaningful relationships rather than superficial encounters. If it's seeking spiritual experience, you engage in practices that open you to transcendent states. This is sublimation in the Jungian sense, not denial of the body or spirit-matter dualism, but elevation that honors the energy's source. The artist who paints with full-body presence, the entrepreneur who builds with passionate commitment, the parent who loves with fierce dedication, the spiritual seeker who approaches the divine with the same intensity others bring to romantic pursuit. But here's what nobody tells you. This process will bring you face to face with your shadow. All that energy you've been directing elsewhere, it's been protecting you from parts of yourself you didn't want to see. When you stop the distraction, when you pull your energy back from its scattered pursuits, you have to meet what's been waiting in the dark. And here's where I need you to pay close attention, because what comes next is the work that most people skip, and it's exactly why they stay stuck in the same patterns for decades. The real transformation isn't in channeling the energy away from sexuality and towards something higher. The real transformation is in integrating all of it, the desire, the darkness, the creativity, the spirituality, into a conscious whole. Jung called this the encounter with the shadow, and it's not optional if you want to work with your full power. Here's what Jung understood that terrifies most people. The same energy that drives your highest creativity also fuels your darkest impulses. You cannot cherry-pick which parts of your psyche to work with. Wholeness means integrating all of it, the light and the shadow, the socially acceptable and the forbidden, the spiritual and the carnal. The shadow, in Jungian terms, is everything you've repressed or denied about yourself. It's the aggressive impulses you've labeled as bad. It's the sexual fantasies you're ashamed of. It's the ambition you hide behind false humility. It's the power you're afraid to claim. And yes, It's the raw sexual energy you've been taught to fear. Most spiritual teachings tell you to transcend the lower self, to rise above base desires, to purify yourself of shadow elements. Jung said the opposite. You must descend into the shadow, meet it consciously, and integrate it. Not act out every impulse that's unconscious identification with the shadow, but acknowledge its existence, understand its origins, and reclaim the energy that's been locked in repression. Here's why this matters for sexual energy specifically. The shame around sexuality isn't just about social conditioning. It's also about the sheer power of this energy. When you feel intense sexual attraction or creative passion, you're encountering a force that could upend your carefully constructed life. It could make you leave a safe relationship for an uncertain one. It could make you abandon a stable career for a creative risk. It could reveal desires that don't fit your self-image. The shadow contains your unlived life, all the potentials you've denied, all the paths you didn't take, all the versions of yourself you rejected to become who you are now. And sexual energy, being so powerful, often carries the weight of these unlived possibilities. That's why sexual fantasies are often about more than just sex. They're symbolic expressions of aspects of your personality that want expression. Jung discovered this in his own analysis of what he called the anima, the feminine aspect in men, and animus, the masculine aspect in women. These aren't just about gender, they're about the contrasexual elements in every psyche that hold valuable qualities the conscious personality has disowned. When men integrate the anima, they access intuition, emotional depth, and relational capacity. When women integrate the animus, they access assertiveness, intellectual clarity, and directed will. Sexual energy often becomes the catalyst for this integration because it refuses to be ignored. It demands attention. It creates symptoms when repressed. It forces confrontation with what you've been avoiding. This is why midlife crises often have a sexual component. It's not really about sex, it's about the psyche demanding that unlived potentials finally get their due. The integration process requires what Jung called the tension of opposites. You must hold both your socially adapted self and your shadow self in consciousness simultaneously without letting either dominate. This creates tremendous psychological tension, the tension between who you've been and who you could become, between safety and growth, between the known and the unknown. But here's the alchemical secret Jung discovered. When you hold this tension consciously, without collapsing into either pole, something new emerges. Jung called it the transcendent function, the psyche's ability to create a third thing that transcends and includes the opposites. Your conscious self and your shadow don't fight to the death. They marry. They generate something neither could produce alone. This is when your sexual energy stops being a problem to manage and becomes rocket fuel for transformation. The person who's integrated their shadow doesn't have less libido, they have more access to it, more conscious choice about how to direct it, and more capacity to let it serve their deepest purposes. You can feel the difference. The person operating from integrated wholeness has a quality of presence that's unmistakable. There's no internal war broadcasting itself as anxiety or aggression. There's no energy being wasted on maintaining false personas. There's no diminishment of power through repression. Just clear, focused, potent life force directed by conscious will in service of authentic purpose. But Jung was clear. This integration isn't a one-time achievement. It's an ongoing process he called individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming more fully yourself. Each new stage of life brings new shadow material to integrate, new energies to consciously direct, new aspects of potential seeking expression. The question isn't whether you'll encounter your shadow. Life guarantees you will. The question is whether you'll meet it consciously, with curiosity and courage, or whether it will ambush you through symptoms, crises, and unconscious acting out. Your sexual energy will be the messenger either way. The only choice is whether you'll learn to read the message. So, how do you actually live this? How do you take these psychological insights and embody them in your daily life? Living from integrated wholeness isn't about achieving some perfect state where you never feel confused or conflicted. It's about developing a fundamentally different relationship with your own energy and your own psyche. Let me give you the practical framework Jung's work points toward. First, establish a practice of psychological hygiene. Just as you shower daily to maintain physical health, you need daily practices that maintain psychological clarity. This means dream journaling to track your unconscious communications. Regular time in solitude to feel what you actually feel without the noise of others' expectations. Creative expression that gives your psyche a channel beyond words. Movement practices that let energy flow through your body rather than getting stuck in your head. Second, develop discernment between urges to act and invitations to understand. When you feel intense sexual energy, intense creative restlessness, intense anything, pause before acting. Ask, what is this energy actually seeking? Is this impulse-wise? Or is it my shadow unconsciously trying to sabotage the life I'm building? Is this authentic desire? Or am I running from something uncomfortable? This discernment doesn't mean you never act on desire. It means you act from consciousness rather than compulsion. There's a massive difference between conscious choice and unconscious reaction, even when the external behavior looks the same. Third, create containers in your life where your full energy can flow. This might mean a creative practice that you protect fiercely, a relationship where you can show up authentically, shadow and all. Work that actually engages your passion rather than just paying bills. Spiritual or contemplative practices that connect you to something beyond your ego. You need channels worthy of the force moving through you. Fourth, find your people. Jung emphasized that individuation doesn't happen in isolation. You need others who are doing their own inner work, who won't be threatened by your growth or your power, who can reflect back aspects of yourself you can't see alone. Community that celebrates consciousness rather than conformity becomes essential. Fifth, understand that the goal isn't to eliminate desire or transcend your humanity. The goal is to become fully human, which means fully embodied, fully alive, fully present to all of your experience. Jung's vision of the individuated person isn't some ascetic saint who's conquered all earthly desires. It's a whole human being who contains multitudes, who can access the full spectrum of human experience, and who chooses consciously rather than reacting unconsciously. This is radically different from most spiritual or psychological frameworks. You're not trying to become less human, you're trying to become more conscious within your humanity. Your sexual energy, your creative fire, your shadow impulses, these aren't obstacles on the path. They are the path, when engaged consciously. The ultimate purpose of understanding sexual energy in the Jungian sense is this: to reclaim sovereignty over your own life force, to stop giving your power away to unconscious patterns, social conditioning, or external authorities, to become the conscious director of the tremendous energy flowing through you, to create a life that's an authentic expression of your deepest self rather than a performance for others' approval. Jung spent his life proving that human beings are capable of profound transformation when they're willing to do the inner work. Not the comfortable work of positive thinking or surface-level behavior change, but the real work of facing their shadow, integrating their disowned parts, and consciously directing their life force toward authentic purposes. This is your invitation: to stop treating your sexual energy as a problem to be managed or an impulse to be indulged, and to recognize it as the sacred creative force it truly is. To do the inner work of integration, to become conscious, to live from wholeness rather than fragmentation. If this resonates with you, I want to hear about your journey. Drop a comment below sharing one insight that landed for you, or one question this raised. And if you're ready to go deeper into Jungian psychology and the path of individuation, subscribe to this channel. We're building a community of people committed to conscious transformation, and I'd be honored to have you join us. The work begins now. Your energy is waiting for you to meet it consciously. What will you create with it?